Hi, everybody. My name is Finneas. Happy to be here. Everybody, please welcome the composer of the music from the film Hamnet, Max Richter.
Hi.
Real treat to be here talking to you today. Such an admirer of your work, such an admirer of your work in this film. I'll start with questions you've probably answered too many times, but I'm curious. How did you first get involved with Chloe and with this movie in general?
Okay, so the script landed in my inbox. I knew about Chloe's other work, and I loved it. I thought, Nomadland was so special, and her other films so special. So I was excited. I read the script. I thought it was incredible. I was immediately like, this is kind of made for me. So we met up and we talked through it, and I guess we just sort of felt very aligned on like what the big ideas were and how could go about it. I wrote a bunch of stuff sort of straight away, just off the page, about half an hour of music, and just kind of sent that over. And then we had something to talk about, and it kind of went from there. It was great.
What did those first initial pieces that you made from reading the script look like? Were they piano pieces? Were they pieces where you're doing string demos? How did those feel?
I started off working with the choral sounds because I felt like the female voice is so important in this film. The script reads like it's all kind of viewed through the prism of Agnes, Jesse's character. So I wanted that to be kind of the core of the music somehow, the spine, if you like, that kind of. So I was just working with, experimenting with choral material, and I made some, I guess, kind of sketches with that. A couple of piano sketches, some other things as well. Just really for us to have something to have a conversation about.
I read that you also sampled some period-appropriate instrumentation to use as layers. Was there anything that you read the script and thought, I'm going to look into this specific styling, and were there any discoveries made there?
Yeah, it's an Elizabethan film, right? So I wanted there to be some of that DNA in there, but without it being like a pastiche of music from that time. I made a load of recordings with period string instruments, viols and all these sort of slightly more rough-sounding kind of string instruments from that time, and then kind of mangled them all up in the computer and made these kinds of, like a palette, really. And did the same with a choir, Tenebrae, who they specialize in Renaissance music, so just made a lot of material from them. And then I wanted to kind of be able to use that kind of sculpturally, just kind of like a painter in a way.
I was re-listening to the score on its own today after seeing it in the film, and I was very struck by all of the voices, or at least most of them in my observation, having no vibrato at all, just incredibly clear tone, which I found really effective, and it really invoked to me a kind of a adolescent quality, right? I think we associate vibrato with a mature voice.
Okay.
Was that a choice made by you to have it just be bell tone, clear vocals?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I love that sound. I love that kind of very minimal kind of expression. I'm often trying to get kind of the maximum from the minimum, so like in a vocal color when it's almost always super plain like that, when you do a tiny thing, it can feel huge. I guess it sort of evokes, again, the kind of choral music of that time, but without sort of being the choral music of that time.
Yeah, really cool. So you write these first sort of sketches, demos, pieces that you're inspired to make, play them for Chloe. I assume you talk about them. Do you then write more off the back of that conversation, or does the film go into production and start shooting then?
Yeah, well, kind of working with those sketches when they were scouting locations, when they were rehearsing, when they, it kind of became part of the organism overall. And then she, they shot the film, and then she made her first cut, which she made just on her own, I think, over last Christmas, And she just used a bunch of this stuff in it. So it kind of became sort of baked in, I guess. And then we just kind of, I think, more or less sort of co-evolved the score and the edit over the next few months, and very kind of easygoing kind of conversational process, really.
Were there any specific portions of the film that you felt after making those initial pieces and seeing them tempt into the picture, you're watching her first cut and you're thinking like, ooh, wow, that's really maybe different than it felt in the script. I'm excited to write something new for this sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the nice things about working with film, is that you really never know what's going to work, right? We all have these ideas. We're like, oh yeah, I know, I'm going to do this, and then you do it and it's like, and it's like, and you feel like you need to, it's like, no, let's do something else. So there's always, I really like that kind of feeling of being like in a laboratory and just pouring stuff in test tubes until something blows up, I like that a lot, yeah.
Did anything blow up specifically in this?
Yeah, well, I guess the thing that I found actually is that, I'd used all these sort of string instruments to make these kind of ghost versions of themselves. And I found that after about the first sort of 45 minutes, the kind of electronic language just starts to creep in. And I kind of wasn't expecting that in a way, but I really enjoyed that about it, yeah.
Are you comfortable with us talking about the role that On the Nature of Daylight plays in this film?
Sure, yeah.
I only ask because I think I said this to Max backstage, but he really has written the kind of film score equivalent of a song like Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. He's written this piece that I think has been so evocative and inspirational for different composers and different directors and filmmakers. And, it has worked so beautifully several times in this. And I assume when you watched this first cut, it was tempted into it, right?
Yeah, it was tempting at the end. And I was just like, oh, okay, it's that. I'm going to obviously replace that. So I wrote a cue, which I thought was quite good, really. But no. So what happened is that Chloe and I then got into sort of a whole series of conversations about why she was so passionate that it should be On the Nature of Daylight at the end. And it was actually a really interesting story. So it turns out that when she is making a film, she doesn't really ever intend to shoot the ending of the script. She sort of discovers it in the production. So on the page, the film ends with Hamlet saying, "The rest is silence," and he dies, and then that's it, it's black. So the whole last sequence with the hands reaching out and Hamlet coming back and all of that, that's not there. It's not on the page. And in the production, they got quite close to the end of the shoot. They had, I think, 4 days left, and she was sort of, I haven't got the end of the film. And then Jessie sent Chloe On the Nature of Daylight, which is a piece she didn't know. And she had a kind of like epiphany on the car on the way to the set, and kind of had this vision of the end of the film. So they changed what they were doing, and they shot that amazing ending sequence. So when she told me that, I was like, okay. Fair enough,
I mean, to me, I think two things. I mean, I assume, this room is full of film buffs and people who are obsessive about this subject matter and this, art form. As a person who's a music enthusiast, it's such an interesting experience to be watching this film and discovering new music as it develops into itself, and hearing things for the first time, and then to hear this piece that I've heard and loved before in my life. I would make an analogy to a pop song that I love. You know what I mean? It really does remind me of the other things I've loved in my life, and I listen to that piece on its own. So, completely respect it. And I think the rest of your score, you are the author of On the Nature of Daylight. The rest of the score does blend perfectly into that amazing piece of music. So, desire to make a new thing, and I appreciate her desire to be like, don't, it's so good. Let's let it rock. I also love that she'd hired you and then was like, what is this on the nature of daylight? That's so sick too.
It's so funny, right? That's really funny. It's like, no, I didn't know this piece. I'm like, okay.
Did you feel, I know that you have 3 children, was there, what was the thing when you were reading the materials and then watching the film that you felt the most sort of emotionally resonated with you in your life as a father and a husband?
I mean, I think the family life, the way it's drawn in the film, is just gorgeous. The kids are amazing. Obviously, Jesse and Paul are incredible. It's like the sense of the relationship is extraordinary. And actually, I visited the set when they were in the Globe, and you could feel that vibe, on the set. It was extraordinary, the energy. And I think that's a huge tribute to Chloe. I mean, as a father, seeing that story unfold, with Hamnet dying, I mean, that's hard. It's really, really hard, that stuff. And, it's a shattering performance, I think, from Jacoby and Jesse is, unbelievable. So, yeah, I mean, it's a hard watch, isn't it? But incredibly beautiful.
Did pretty much everybody in this room just come out of the screening? Yeah. Yeah, we were just talking, Max was saying, he was like, it's been interesting to come to these Q&As after the movies. People are destroyed.
Sorry.
I watched the film a few days ago. I think if I'd just watched it, I'd be all verklempt right now talking to you. Were there moments in this film that you felt going into it, you're like, I'm going to try to write something, but I feel like there's such a stillness in the musical compositions, and there are these things that carry over these very silent landscapes, right? She's walking through the woods, and you're listening to the bird fly overhead. Yeah. How did you navigate the music's role with silence?
Yeah, well, I think the silence in the film is amazing. And I think that's something Chloe has worked with before. I mean, Nomadland is full of these amazing silences. We had the incredible Johnny Byrne on the sound design. So good. There was a kind of a constant dialogue, I guess, between like foreground type action things. There's a lot of talking in the film. But then, we have the voice of the forest and the kind of the voice of the earth and all of this extraordinary stuff. And so the score, again, I'm trying to sort of do the minimum most of the time, just to kind of, I guess I've thought about it, I said this before, but it's like I wanted the score to be really transparent to the psychology. And to just kind of hold the action almost like a kind of amniotic fluid sort of surrounding the story without sort of telling us things, Yeah.
If you could go back to Max before starting this project, is there any advice you'd give to yourself right at the beginning of this that would inform it? Or do you feel like the discovery and the things that you spend time on as part of the process and just let it rip?
I think you always really just rely on the things you don't know, right? And in this film, there were just so many beautiful discoveries, seeing those performances come to life. And just, I'm always sort of feel like I'm sort of trying to reach outside the kind of circle of light of stuff that I know to kind of what's out there. The kind of what's next feeling. And this film was a really wonderful chance to do that.
Does anybody have a specific question they'd like to ask? I always like to be mindful of questions. It's okay if you don't, but yes.
Will there be a CD release?
Yeah, I think CD and vinyl. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Out now.
There was a CD release. Anybody else?
Did you feel like there was something in this whole process that you felt like you learned from it?
Yeah. I mean, you learn from everything you're doing. There's always, I think probably like most creative people, you start a thing feeling like it's impossible and you have no idea how to do it, and that's kind of normal and natural. And then the material sort of starts to talk to you, and it feels like it starts to have its own kind of intention. And I love that process of like discovering what that is, discovering what the properties of this world are, and kind of exploring it. So I think that whole writing process is kind of learning, yeah.
Do you have a piece that was the easiest to write, and which one was the most difficult?
Wow. Yeah, I guess there's a very sweet little bit of storytelling quite near the beginning of the film where Will tells the story of Orpheus. And a lot of what I do is about taking stuff away, remove material all the time. And that started out a lot more, a lot more stuff. And I was just like, less. It's a moment in the film that I really love. It's when they kind of first connect. Yeah.
One of the first things I noticed is how loud and restless the wind was, and your score kind of contrasted that in a lot of ways. And I wanted to know, did that wind play a part in the way you wrote, and how that influenced it?
Yeah, I mean, Johnny, he's kind of a mad genius, isn't he? They'd made so many recordings, like in the forest, all different winds, all different, they were out there all the time.
Were those things you were sent pretty early on?
Yeah. So that was kind of evolving as I was writing. So it became really part of the texture. And I think a lot of maybe in some ways a lot of the reason the score has got this kind of transparency all the time is just because the natural sounds are so beautiful, and actually you want you always want to feel like the forest, the earth, the air. It's very kind of sensory, the whole storytelling in the film, I think.
Well, really appreciate your time, Max. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for scoring this movie and doing this wonderful work. Appreciate that you asked me these questions.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.